Welcome everyone to the second day of our conference, and I'm greeting our panelists as well. Unfortunately, the first panelist today couldn't come, František Neupauer, but we have his paper here, and his voice will be Peter Jašek. So I kindly ask him to read František's paper on intervention of the communist regime against religions in Slovakia in 1950.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, as Gergely already said, I'm here instead of my colleague, Mr. František Neupauer, who is researcher from the Department of the Scientific Research and Education, and he feels really very sorry that he is not possible to come here in person, but unfortunately there are some serious family issues which enable him to come to the Warsaw. He is very sorry, but very kindly asked me to read his paper, which name is Intervention of the Communist Regime Against Religious in Slovakia in 1950, and he also prepared some PowerPoint presentation which I hope will be running, and I will help with it. Let me start this contribution by the quotation of the first communist Czechoslovak president, Klement Gottwald, and the quotation is from the February 1950. There are many monasteries. They are all more or less up to anti-state mischief. We have 1,001 reasons to act. We want to gradually concentrate the religious orders together so that we have them under stricter supervision, under more control, so they are not as fragmented as they are now. At the end of quotation. And really the year 1950 in the history of the communist Czechoslovakia was marked by three major anti-church, or more precisely anti-Catholic actions, and this presentation will be focused on two of them, which means in fact the liquidation of the male and female religious orders in the former Czechoslovakia with the focus on the Slovakia. So here is the very short overview of the above mentioned three anti-church actions which took place in Czechoslovakia in the 1950. First of all, there was a forcible conversion of the Greek Catholic Church to the Orthodox Church. Practically, it meant the abolition of the entire Greek Catholic Church community. And later, the communist regime started implementing two more actions aimed at liquidating religious communities in the Czechoslovakia. On 13 April 1950, there was a forced liquidation of men's order, religious order, and it was called the Action Key, which key stands as monasteries, because in the Slovak language it is called kláštory. So the key stands for this word. And at the end of the August 1950, it was the Action R, which once again R means nuns, because in the Slovak language it is the reholníčky, is the translation of this word. And it was aimed at liquidating women's religious orders and was implemented also, as I said, in the August 1950. During the liquidation of religious orders in the territory of Czechoslovakia, all armed forces intervened to send hundreds of religious orders to internation. And in my presentation, I will at least partially outline how there was an intervention against male and subsequently female religious orders. And I will include also some personal testimonies of some witnesses of those events. Here is somehow the overview, the statistical. So in the March 1950, a show trial was held with representatives of male religious orders in Prague. The media was flooded with anti-church propaganda about so-called Vatican spies and traitors who want to start the Third World War. At the regional level, meetings were held under the leadership of the state security and the other units of the armed forces. At those meetings, the numbers of weapons and machine guns that were to be used in the intervention against men orders were specified. A state security survey of the monasteries was carried out. Exact plans of the monasteries were drawn up. The last preparatory meetings at the regional level took place on the 7th April of 1950. This day in year 1950 was the day of the martyrdom of Jesus Christ, in the church calendar, Good Friday. The start of the event was scheduled for Thursday, April 13 at midnight. Again, if we were to look at the church calendar, we will find that the event itself took place on the days of the biggest church feast during the Easter octave. At the scheduled time, members of the armed forces occupied the monasteries. After breaking into the monasteries, they gathered the monks and informed them about the reason for the intervention, which was the alleged anti-state activities of the male orders. Subsequently, monks were taken by prepared buses and trucks to the so-called concentration monasteries. The monks, of course, did not know where they were being taken, and many of them thought that they were going into the Soviet gulags. I will help myself with this, maybe we can call it something like the map, but it's the handwritten, I may say try to make a map, which means the concentration monasteries and the other monasteries in Slovakia where the monks have been collected. As I can see, this is the map from the setup phase of the so-called action key, where the routes from individual monasteries to the centralizing monastery are shown. On the night of April 13 to 14, with the help of the People's Militia, the National Security Corps and the State Security, and with the assistance of church secretaries and Communist Party officials from the relevant district national committees and regional national committees, a decisive part of the male monasteries was in fact liquidated. All over Slovakia, almost 900 monks from 11 religious orders gathered on this night. On the night on May 3rd to 4, 1950, the rest of the men's monasteries were also liquidated in the action which was called K2. These two interventions affected more than 1,000 monks from 15 religious orders living in 76 monasteries in the Slovakia. After these two actions, the monks in Slovakia were concentrated in the so-called concentration monasteries with a prison regime. The strictest regime was in the monastery in Podolinec, and there was the largest number of monks. The premises of the monastery were guarded by an armed guard. On the monastery building, windows were gradually barred and barbed wire was installed. A guard tower was built in the country yard, and the surroundings of the concentration monastery were illuminated at night with searchlights. Monks who violated the prescribed order were punished by solitary confinement in the cellar. Behind the walls of the monastery in Podolinec, there were also young students who were connected to the religious community only by the fact that they lived in the monastery premises as students of the school run by the religious order. For example, Emil Rončák, who was 16 at the time, was among them, and let me quote at least a short passage from his memories. This is the quotation. "We had no blankets or pillows. Opposite the massive door was a window about 60 up to 40 centimeters at a height of about 2.5 meters. We did not achieve anything there, but in all the gloom, at least a little light, the warmth of the sun and a feeling of possible freedom passed through him." Time passed slowly. It is the following of the quotation. "Only boarding for hygiene and canteen. Otherwise, endless conversations about our situation. We felt that they were with us in spirit. We divided the guards into those who silently performed their duty and those who kept giving orders and shouting loudly at us. We had a hard time dealing with it when they shouted and belittled the priests. Educated and pious, our teachers were modest and decent. Real role model for us," is the end of quotation. And here you can see also the Emil Rončák, some sentences from the quotation I've already read. Father Andrej Konc who was a Redemptorist, recalls his internment in the monastery in Králíky in Moravia, today Czech Republic. Especially the older monks found it hard to bear the tough situation. They didn't even have blankets, while Action Key took place in April 1950 when, for example, there were still snow outside around the centralization monastery. As a result of the cold and hunger, some, especially older monks, fell ill and many even died. We can talk directly about genocide against the religious orders. Ladislav Lenz was also in the novitiate, who later wrote to me, I mean the colleague František Neupauer, a letter. He also perceived the whole event as a deep intervention to his personal life, impossibility of further study and development. He was also in the novitiate with the later father Armbruster, who was expelled from Czechoslovakia because he had Austrian citizenship. He could later continue his studies, of course, become a priest, monk, and even later served as rector of the university in Tokyo in Japan. We could talk about further persecutions, imprisonment, and escapes of monks to the free world and their life in the illegality even after returning from prison. The fact that Action Key itself was and is considered an extreme action of the communist regime against its own population is also evidenced by its importance for the present. In Slovakia, the 13th April is the Memorial Day of the Slovak Republic, which is referred to as the Day of the Unjustly Prosecuted. Religious and historians call this event also the Barbarian Night or the Bartholomew Night of the Czechoslovak religious. Here just the small remark that the Memorial Day is not a state holiday, but it's something like the memory when we commemorate some very important historical event. The second part of this paper will be dedicated to the action R. As I already said, the R means nuns, which in Slovak language is the reholničky. After Action Key was carried out, the regime's attention turned to women orders. The liquidation of women's monasteries was named Action R. As early as the spring of 1949, the Slovak Office for Church Affairs registered 24 women's religious orders and congregations in Slovakia, which owned more than 200 monasteries, including houses and apartments, in which more than 4,000 nuns lived. At the beginning of the summer of 1950, the communists dismissed more than 300 nuns, teachers, because the leaders of the Communist Party claimed that they had an anti-state influence on the students. In the summer of 1950, the regime also so-called nationalized the kindergartens. Action R was supposed to take place from August 29 to 31 in 1950. The General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Czechoslovak Republic, Rudolf Slansky, who was later sentenced for capital punishment, also called for the liquidation of women's monasteries and religious communities. After its launch, hundreds of believers openly protested in several places. They protected the nuns with their own bodies, lay down on the road in front of the moving cars, formed clusters. The National Security Corps, called to realize the action against protested people, used weapons, and many people have been arrested. Looking at the nuns persecuted by the communist regime, we can admire their tenacity, humility, and courage. But on the other hand, we have to realize the reality that they faced face to face with the executors of the evil regime. Outwardly, the propaganda declared care for religious orders is also associated with physical violence against women, unfortunately also with rape. In the Czech television documentary, you can hear the clear words of priest Antonín Huvar about the coarseness of the greatest grain, which must be known out of respect for the true. I will once again quote. That was really probably the worst, because they didn't even have a way to defend themselves. They stripped them naked, threw them on the table, and abused them. It was there, it was right there, the end of quotation. So this also happened during the Action Key on the territory of former Czechoslovakia. The nuns subsequently found themselves in internment monasteries, some directly in prison. They suffered a total of more than 300 years in communist prisons. Sister Justina Tuková remembers how her older fellow prisoners from the ranks of nuns said that they could not bear the touch of clothes on their bodies because of the whipping and torture. At the end, at least a short reflection of the representatives of the totalitarian regime in relation to the nuns. During a meeting of the Czechoslovak and Polish representatives of institutions that had supervision over churches, the director of the Secretariat of Church Affairs at the Ministry of the Culture of the Czechoslovak Republic, Vladimír Janku, clearly stated that the issue of religious orders in Czechoslovakia has been resolved. All the nuns are already at retirement age, and practically we are just waiting for them to die out, which is the attitude of the communist regime towards this situation. Last part of this paper will be the conclusion. Here you can see Sister Justina Tuková, which I already made the quotation. After the liquidation of the monasteries, the libraries were destroyed and many precious manuscripts, prints, paintings and furniture were stolen due to the treatment of the state authorities. The buildings themselves were mainly acquired by regional and local national committees, various administrative offices, education associations, children's homes, and so on. The communists only used the premises stolen from the religious orders and did not invest in them for many decades, so they were often an unsuitable environment for children's homes or social facilities for the elderly. Intervening forces sometimes even opened the graves in monasteries in search for some valuable assets. After the fall of the communist regime, the premises were handed over to the restored religious orders in a desolate state and even sometimes with a reproach, why are the religious taking it from us? In the report for the political secretariat of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia, which took stock of the acquired material values, the result of the event was marked as the largest transfer of the property since the appropriation of German property, so-called nationalization and land reform. In other words, it was the third largest theft since 1945. The most painful consequence of the interventions was the fate of thousands of religious men and women who, as a result of the intervention, became undesirable persons in a country ruled by a communist regime. With its interventions in 1950, the communist regime began a process of harsh persecution that touched the personal lives of many people. Some of them were later declared as martyrs. The communist regime promises progress, paradise on earth, but in reality, it just created the martyrs. Thank you in the name of my colleague, Mr. Neupauer, for your attention.
Thank you very much, Peter, for reading František's paper. It would have been a pity to miss it from the conference. It contains so much shocking information. And now we are traveling to Poland, and I'll ask Mr. Przemysław Pazik from both the Warsaw University and the Research Centre for the Humanities in Hungary to give his paper about breaking the spirit, oath of loyalty of the Polish Episcopate and the completion of the Stalinist frame for church-state relations. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, so let me begin with financial disclaimer because this is what I have to do. So the research here has been financed by the European Union under ERC funding. The headquarters of the project is in Budapest with the Research Centre for the Humanities. We do have our logo. It's here. We do have our website, so I kindly invite you to visit it. And the focus of the project are the oaths of loyalty taken in Central and Eastern Europe throughout last 200 years. And I would like you today to focus on a unique event, the collective oath of the nearly entire Polish Episcopate, which happened on 17 December 1953. So in my talk, I would like to present you the context, the Polish context of when and why the oath happened, and what was the meaning of it. Then just move to the act of swearing in of the bishops, and to see the repercussions of the fact, the reactions, the assessment of the policy, to situate it within the intentions of the communist regime who wanted bishops to swear an oath. And then I would like to offer 3 comparisons, and then maybe we'll reach some conclusions. I hope they will stir up the debate. So often when you read about the policy of the early communist regime toward the church and also society, there is mention of the salami tactics. So there's slicing small pieces of freedom, small pieces of like non-communist world, just to get it all. And I would like to invite you to the other metaphor, so the peeling off. If we imagine the Catholic life as the hierarchical church in the center, and then the various manifestations of like believers, both religious and lay, I would like to show you that between 1945 and 1953, like those layers have been constantly and subsequently cut off from like the Catholic life. So the first moment where there were 2 years when the communist regime felt maybe not as strong to pursue the confrontational policy. We have many gestures of a goodwill, like key political figures participating in religious ceremonies. We have declarations of religious freedom. On the other hand, we have the one-sided annulment of the Concordat. The Concordat was from 1925. The annulment happened in September 45. So we have some move hostile to church, but still there is this possibility of a kind of religious liberty. And this ends with 1947 and with the first wave of persecution or like tightening of the policy. There is this meeting of a political bureau with the position paper of Julius Bestiger, who sets up the agenda for the coming years. And the first to disappear is what I called, and not only me, like the actors there called it social Catholicism. So this network of like lay groups, study organization, like prayer organizations that are disappearing. Like either formal ones or informal ones are treated as a threat to the national security, or as something that is superfluous in the modernizing Stalinist, soon-to-be Stalinist Poland. Therefore, they are cancelled. Their members are arrested. The big portion of Catholic press disappears around those years. The political party that tried to be Christian Democrats as much as you could in those times disappears between 1946 and 47. So this is like the moment that the Catholics, mostly lay, lose the societal and political representation. The third stage is the tightening and the attack on the institutions that are not focusing on the religious piety. However, they are Catholic-run or Catholic-inspired. So we have the attack on religion schools or schools that have some religion context. We have attack on institutions that are oriented on childcare and healthcare. Everything is statalized and de-Christianized in a way. Yes, so this is like what's happening in 1950s. And the peak of it is the hijacking of the Caritas organization, which is mainly the biggest charity organization. And the communists imposed their own governing body of Caritas. And then thus creating a big number of relatively well-paid positions for Catholics or priests who'd like to engage in state-controlled caritas. This framework will then be adopted by two organizations. So first one is the Pax Associations for lay Catholics who'd like to be, lay intellectuals who'd like to be active politically. They're within the frameworks of Pax, they can get job, they can get platform, as long as they're supporting socialism, they can be visible. And the same goes for like clergy. There's a combatant organization is being set up with its own priests committee, and then also if you are a member of this committee or you have a position within the committee, you can get like a salary. So there's no salary or congrua for priests, while the patriotic positive priests can join ranks of those organizations and hence receive some money, some support. Of course, like there's a price to pay. And faced with such policies, the Polish Church decides to do like a controversial move back then, so to sign an agreement to limit. Like, it was self-limitation from the side of the church to resign from all those social activities. On the other hand, it was expression of like ecclesiastical liberty in terms of internal governance. And I think that like this agreement of 14 April was very badly received in Vatican as a step back, as a sign of weakness, and probably some readiness to acquiesce with the communist demands. There were some explaining to do, like some bishops went to Rome and did some explaining, and the line was accepted. Like the author of the agreement was from the church side, Cardinal Wyszyński, Primate Wyszyński, and he saw the benefit in this agreement because it's not only church that accepted some burden or like accepted self-limitation, but it also, the agreement was also binding on, or should be binding on the government side. So this is the moment, according to the church, the Catholic Church in Poland, that the state recognizes its limits vis-a-vis the church. And then what followed, of course, was the state breaking, testing those limits. So the next 3 years or 2.5 years after the signing of agreement is basically the constant pushing of the state. So those and attempt to go beyond the limits of agreement in terms of imposing people or ecclesiastical positions, in terms of imposing a line towards the question of Western ecclesiastical provinces. Yeah, like Professor Łatka mentioned yesterday, that there were apostolic administrations, and the government would like to see like full-fledged dioceses there, but without consent of the Pope, it was impossible. So they have a push from the government to the extent to break ties with Rome, which did not happen, and in this context, and then we have like the first moment when the priests are arrested because of being priests. Because earlier we have like arrests and trials and even like sentencing or killing priests, but as well there was also another reason. Like, you know, we have priests who are with the insurgents, so they are treated as insurgents. There are priests who were active politically, so they are tried as political figures, not clergymen. But within the period, you have the first like openly actions against clergy as clergy, and like for publishing religious stuff, for announcing this position of the episcopate, you can get arrested. Yes, so this is like this moment, and then in the height of this period, we have the arrest and of Bishop Kaczmarek of Kielce, and then there's this huge also press campaign to show him as an agent of the USA, to show him as a foreign spy, and then to serve as a proxy for like all the church who is compliant and pushed such policy or stance. And then basically the church as a foreign asset within Polish ranks. And then with 1953, we get to the point that the government is not satisfied with influencing some of the church, some of the clergy through those organizations mentioned. They're not satisfied with the pace of acquiring both like secret collaborators with the security apparatus and both like open collaborators through open channels. And hence the decree of 9th February 53. So the decree of 9th February 1953 on the appointment to ecclesiastical positions is interesting and important because it sets up the structure for government vetting of all candidates or even appointing like candidates to all ecclesiastical positions. They are listed in the decree from vicar to archbishop. Yeah, and we have like on each level, local government or central government has to agree on the candidate to become a vicar, then parish priest, and then higher and higher. From my perspective, the interesting and important thing is the introduction of the obligatory vow of fidelity in the Article 5 of the decree. It's interesting because the use of the word, so they use the word ślubowanie, which I would translate as a vow, instead of przysięga, which would be an oath, the oath. And vow is, in Polish, ślubowanie is more often used in the religious context. So then, when you read the notes of Primat Wyszyński, this really was a problem for him, and he openly stated that this is not a vow. A vow is you do, like a priest can do a vow only in the religious context. And he really refrained from using this language in this secular context. And with the promulgation of the decree, there is the beginning of the swearing-in action. So for the first time, there is a policy that targets all of the clergy. Like every single priest should come to the regional office for religious affairs and sign or pronounce this vow, this oath. And then there is interesting policy of the security apparatus collaborating with the offices of religious affairs to vet and to invite only some clergymen to take an oath, while the rest was in fear of being left without any kind of position. Hence, the Episcopate, Polish Episcopate wanted all priests to take an oath, because this would at least would ensure that they would be able to act as vicars and as parish priests. And this vetting process, for the first time, provided security apparatus with some candidates for recruits for like secret collaborators. So beforehand, there are some priests that decided to collaborate with the security apparatus. However, like the apparatus itself complains about the low numbers, and with this universal action, they can reach out to every single priest, and they try to somehow win him for their cause. The swearing-in action started in March 53. The fun fact is that the text of the oath was published only on the 5th of May, 1953. So for the first 2 months, the text was circulating, but it was not official. It appears in a very low-ranking legal document, the ordinance. In theory, the ordinance should be binding only for the state institutions, not for like average citizens. However, it was of course abused, and this is one of many cases of the application of the law outside of what we would expect of the normal rule of law proceeding. So with the text, and then In the meat of the 2053, there's a problem that, priests started to be sworn in, initially in the western provinces, so like those mostly deprived of priests, and those in question because the western border, on the western border of Poland. So it starts with Lower Silesia and Upper Silesia and Wrocław and Katowice, and then extends throughout whole the country. The reaction of the church is that they are not satisfied, they are not happy with where the church-state relations are going. They consider the decree and the policy adopted as threatening to the future relations and to the agreement. But also there is determination to not to bow to this kind of administrative abuse. And this is shown in talks between Prelate Wyszynski and Franciszek Mazur. I have the quotations from the penultimate meeting. The last meeting took place in March '53, and then the state went on with its policy without asking the church's opinion. To counter that, on 8th of May, the Polish Episcopate prepared an aide-memoir which was presented to the communist government. It's like customary entitled non possumus because it really stressed like the red lines to where bishops thought the agreement can be reached, or where it's like well beyond their ability to agree to it. And then you have a strong criticism of the decree which violates, in bishop lights, the agreement of 1950. And then the September 53 comes with like the last decade of September 53. We have the end of the trial of Bishop Kaczmarek, who's sentenced to 12 years in prison. We have subsequent arrest of Cardinal Wyszynski after his sermon when he repeated the non possumus phrase. And then after the arrest, we have the reconstitution of the episcopate and the very how to say, compliant declaration of the episcopate, which reinterprets, it changes position of the episcopate from the declaration of aide-memoir from 8th of May, and also reinterprets the agreement of 1950. And this is like the desired direction. So the words published on 29 September 53 are the very important addendum to the agreement of 1950, as the government would like it to be interpreted. I won't read it, but you can see that there's a certain interpretation of the agreement. There is emphasis on the political activism or lack thereof of clergy. So in theory it's banned, and in practice it should go in this given direction. And then, like if you agree with communists, your activism is okay. If you don't, you're abusing religion for political purposes. Yeah? Basically, this is the policy line. And then you have the idea that you can strengthen the agreement of 1950 by going beyond it. It's like some dialectic move. Coming to the oath itself, it happened by the very end of the oath action. So it was supposed to end for priests with 1903. It lasted a bit longer. However, by the time the bishops took their oath, most of the priests have already been sworn in. And then we have the theatralization of the oath itself. So all bishops who are not imprisoned back then are invited to the office of the government. I took the photos because it was one of the first ceremonies that was performed in the office. The office was just reopened after reconstruction in 1953. So one of the first things that was happening there was the oath of the bishops. So they were all invited to this monumental building in the destroyed Warsaw, and the meeting was recorded. We have audio recording. I did a transcription, the translation. There's no video recording of the event. And then the event opened with Deputy Prime Minister Cyrankiewicz framing what will happen now. Yeah, so he told that they should stress their loyalty, and this oath complements the agreement of 1950, while the agreement of 1950 did not mention anything about the oath itself, and it was done purposefully by the time. The second stage of the Yes, the second stage of the ceremony was the reply of Bishop Klepacz, who was interim head of the Episcopate, and then he also replied that there is nothing wrong with the oath, and then there's the bishops are the Episcopate supports the economic and cultural development of Polish People's Republic, and this concludes with the text, or reading out of the text itself. I just reproduce it from the Ordinance of Prime Minister. So basically, just to wrap it up, the intermediate aftermath of the oath was shocking for the Catholics outside, the Poles outside Poland. We have there was a strong critical letter from Bishop Gawlina, who took care of Polish immigration, and then there's a reply of Bishop Chromański, who was the secretary of the Episcopate. He said that this was acceptable and this is what we had to do. The Polish embassy to the Holy See, which was loyal to the government in London, was also very critical of this and somehow afraid of what would happen after this oath. However, because of the subsequent crisis in the security apparatus, so we have in December 1953, there's escape of Józef Światło, high-ranking officer. He takes a lot of, and basically this escape disorganizes the security apparatus for like a year. And this is the year where really the government could take advantage of this framework with oath, with bishops loyal and priests loyal to the government. And then, with the beginning of the changes of 1956, we have the release of Bishop Kaczmarek and the release of Cardinal Wyszyński. But those figures who did not swear in and will not swear an oath until the very end of their lives. So this marks also the failure of this policy. A short comparison of the oath. So we have, I think it's important to show that in Poland this is a unique event, the collective swearing in, while in Hungary in the same period, it was the first. In Hungary, the oath of 1951 was first of some oaths, and the oath of 1951 in Hungary was registered also in the video and then was broadcasted across country. And then I also showed other differences, like in Hungary, in Polish Concordat, the text was negotiated. One in Poland in 1953 and 1956, the text of the oath was dictated by the government, which also creates some problems. It was the text of the oath itself was object of the counteractions of the Episcopate in 1974 and 1983. And some conclusions, takeouts from our speech, that the oath of December was a peak of this idea, the idea of reshaping the church. The fact that the key figures from Polish Episcopate did not swear in contributed to the failure of this policy, and the fact that the security apparatus could not take advantage of this policy also was a factor. So it was the failure of the administration to deliver from the communist side. There's a problem of collective oath, interesting one, because who did it serve? Did it protect the Episcopate, or did it show the power of the government to impose something on all the bishops? It's an open question. And we have some long effects, because on the other hand, we have bishops who resisted, but on the other, the oath gave a pretext to very intense contacts between government and the clergy in whole Poland, which 20 years after will result in the loyalization policy, but I think I will speak about loyalization policy in the next 2 years when we reach 1970s, our conferences. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very interesting and important paper. And now I ask Mr. Bogusław Wójcik from the Historical Research Office of the IPN to give his paper. Its title is The Youth Underground's Organization as an Antidote to Anti-Religious Propaganda in Rzeszów Province in the first decade after World War II.
Dear colleagues, first I would like to say that I'm very honored to stand before you, and I would like to thank you very much, the organizers, for inviting me to this conference. And I also would like to thank you, Przemysław, for a very good introduction also to my topic. I will summarize my speech in 3 points. I will start with some remarks on the structure and content of my speech. In the main part, I will say a few words about the specificity of underground youth organizations in the first post-war decade in Poland, and then I will discuss selected aspects of our activities in the area of Rzeszów Province. I will focus primarily on their role in preserving ideas, values, and traditions important for the survival of the soul of the nation during the Soviet occupation. Finally, I will come to some conclusions. On the multimedia presentation, you can see my 2 publications concerning the activities of illegal youth organizations in the southeast part of Poland. They contain selected documents produced by officers of the Polish Ministry of Public Security and Ministry of Internal Affairs, judges of military and civil courts, parties, activists, but also young people belonging to these organizations. While working on these publications, I drew attention to the beliefs of young people as important motivators of their actions. Referring to the materials from the first publication, I will try to show that the world of ideas, including religious ideas, to which referred the young conspirators, enabled them to take very risky actions. I am convinced that thanks to these activities such as writing organizational texts, as well as contents disseminated outside in the form of leaflets, appeals, building inscriptions, or the so-called whispering campaign, the members of these organizations were creating a kind of space of independence of minds. It is also interesting that the programs of these organizations included calls to fight for religion freedom and freedom of worship. When interpreting the achievements of young people engaged in the activities of youth organizations, it is worth referring to theories that make it possible to place them in a broader cognitive perspective. For this purpose, I used the assumptions of the history of ideas made by the American philosopher Arthur Lovejoy. To put it simply, it states that people come into a unique mental contact with reality, and the content of their beliefs are obviously connected with the decision they make and their behaviors. These philosophical assumptions will be clearly presented in the written version. At this point, I just want to point out that the minds, at least part of the young generation of Poles after the end of World War II, were not attracted by the communist ideology. In Poland, an open ideological offensive with the use of massive propaganda started in 1948. In the widest possible context, the term of ideology in the Soviet political system refers to the basic philosophical axioms of Marxism-Leninism, such as atheism, class theory, class struggle, and historic mission of the proletariat. In this context, the attack of religion, both in terms of institutional structures and cultural and social tradition, had a clear ideological context. The atheization of the entire society became an objective itself. The removal of religion teaching from schools were regarded as a fundamental condition of this program. Efforts were also made to eliminate other forms of influence of the Catholic Church on school and the youth. Among mentioned effects were, for example, limiting the activity of religious associations and creating educational and propagandist programs aimed at atheization of children and youth. There is no doubt that leaving Poland in the sphere of influence of the USSR after the end of World War II had a direct impact of lives and activities of youth. In Poland, similarly as in the other countries in this region, in the context of the ongoing political, social, and economic changes, there was also a process taking place that was described as an ideological breakthrough, cultural revolution, or ideological revolution. Internally, the purpose of this process was to bring up a new human being, and of course, it was directed at the youngest citizens. It is worth emphasizing that despite these ideological efforts, in the years 1944-1956, the communist regime detected and eliminated 1,000 illegal youth organizations in the Polish territory, which in their ranks gather about 11,000 members. In this context, the Rzeszów Province compares favorably with almost 30 youth organizations and multitude of over 650 young people engaged in their activities. Among the motives that determined such risky behaviors of the youth at the time, the following can be indicated. A modification of the activities of the Polish Scouting and incorporation of youth into the communist organizations by force, easy access to weapons, the struggle of authorities with the religion and church, including the restriction of the activities of the popular Catholic associations such as the Sodality of Our Lady, the Catholic Youth Men Association, and Catholic Young Women Association. When we analyze the reasons for establishing illegal youth organizations, it is worth, among others, looking at the oaths taken by their members. In all of them, there are references to God and saints as well as religious values. It proves that religious beliefs were a fundamental point of reference in the worldview of these young people. Other ideologies were also judged from the perspective of religious claims. In the most cases, the activities of young people fighting against the communist regime came down to the propaganda actions, struggle to preserve culture and national identity, of which significant in Polish conditions were also the religious rules and practices. The youth organized self-education meetings where, for example, literary works were read and historical texts were analyzed. They also planned propaganda campaigns. These were frequently spontaneous. Nevertheless, at this time of manifestation of a youth rebellion and form of anti-propaganda, for example, publishing their own press, became a carrier of a historical truth, gave encouragement, mobilized others for action. According to statistics, the increased detection of youth independence organizations occurred across the country in the years 1947-1951. The situation in the territory of Rzeszów Province corresponds to these national-wide trends. The average period of activity of these organizations was about 2.5 years. However, it should be emphasized that the disproportions in terms of the length of the activity between individual organizations were large. For example, the activities of youth underground from Przemysław lasted for only 3 months. Regarding the duration of existence, the following comes to the fore: the Union of Free Polish Youth and the Underground Polish Army. Among the largest organizations were Youth of Great Poland and the Eaglets. In the most cases, the organizations described consisted of young men. The only typical organization of young women in the Rzeszów Province was the League of the Youth Fight Against Communism. The creation of women units was also envisaged in the organizational structures of the Eaglets and the Democratic Home Army. Their basic tasks were tearing of propaganda posters, displaying leaflets, illegal press distribution, weapon delivery, making a list of communist activists, preparation of plans of the facilities of strategic importance. Mentioned above, League of Youth Struggle Against Communism was established in March 1947 by schoolgirls from junior high school in Przeworsk. The immediate reason for establishment of organization was the restriction of activities of the influential and popular among young people, the Sodality of Our Lady. In response to these restrictions, after talking to Father Mieczysław Ryś, the catechist, Teresa Szkoda, together with her schoolmates Helena Rusinek, Czesława Tomczyszyn, Izabela Ryś, and Zofia Ubieszyńska, decided to establish a new organization in place of the Sodality of Our Lady. During the first meeting at the local cemetery, they agreed that the goal of their activities would be the protection of the youth from the communist indoctrination and the propaganda struggle against the political system. The Eaglets organization was established in Rudnik upon the River San at the end of April and beginning of May 1947 by students of a local state junior high school and high school. Stanisław Mandecki, Władysław Konefał, Lesław Popowicz, Kazimierz Dechnik. They chose the name for the organization during a pilgrimage to the sanctuary of Our Lady in Częstochowa, motivated by the example of the 15 older schoolmates who died in the years 1940-1920 in the struggle for a free Poland. Searching for ideological and organizational models, the founders of Eaglets referred to the activities of the Philomats and Filarets, religious associations, and the pre-war program of the Polish Scouting. They were clearly influenced by subjects related to Polish messianism too. These inspirations indicate the significant importance of the formation of young minds in those realities of both the Catholic Church doctrine and humanistic education. The organizational phenomenon of the Eaglets is demonstrated by the period of operation lasting more than 2 years, high numbers, and preserved documentation produced by the members of this organization. The most important idea that the young people belonging to the Eaglets referred to was a free homeland, Christ Poland. The Democratic Home Army was established on September 1949 in Godowa by Eugeniusz Szczepankiewicz, Jan Prokopowicz, Kazimierz Łyszczerz, Jerzy Żeglin, and Tadeusz Nowak. Young people from Strzyżów Powiat, deprived of the opportunity to organize their in religious associations, aware that the modification of the activities of the Polish Scouting was an attempt to incorporation them into communist organizations, like many of their peers chose the underground activities. In the case of Democratic Home Army, it didn't last for long, and its fundamental forms were meetings, of which about 30 were held until the organization was liquidated in April 1950. The course of meeting itself, which you can reconstruct by the means of the reports written down after the end of them, also indicate the character profile of the participating students. These meetings started and ended with a common prayer. New members took oaths during them. The program of the organization was discussed, and as a part of political training, the changes taking place in Poland were considered. The last of the organization selected to this presentation was established in Mielec during the occupation period. Over time, it changed names and operated as Links Units, the Steel Poles, and Freedom and Justice. Its founders included Józef Umiński, Zbigniew Maziarzewski, and Stanisław Nęk. The young conspirators took part in the clandestine education classes, continued scout training, collected information on the activities on the war front, stole weapons from Wehrmacht soldiers. After the Soviet army entered Poland, they continued to collect weapons and created a considerable arsenal. In the newspaper Wola, Will, published in 1946, they publish political jokes and commentary regarding the following events in the light of the information provided by Western radio stations. In one issue of this newspaper, they defined the Polish Workers' Party, and citation, "It is a communist party established during the war in Russia by Soviets and traitors, and is now subordinate, as in fact every communist party in the whole world, to Moscow. It is maintained and protected by it. On Moscow's orders, it seeks to communalize Poland, that is, to abolish religion, private property, introduce a kolkhoz, murder opposition factors, and in general to introduce the Soviet regime." So it's time for some conclusions. Reading the text of activists of the underground youth organization written in the post-war years in Rzeszów Province is not able to fully express the state of mind of the representatives of this community. On the one hand, their bitterness regarding the trauma of war, lost childhood, or difficult living conditions. On the other hand, their youthful idealism and will to live that prevented them from falling into either existential pessimism or accepting a change in the traditional system of values. The above-mentioned examples of the activities demonstrate both the determination of this community in opposing the policy of communist authorities, as well as the self-awareness of its members. The described events and textual sources show that religious principles and practices were at the center of the young people's value system. I mean, of course, of these people from the described underground organizations. Despite the anti-religious policy, beliefs relating to religious claims remained a key point of reference in their viewing reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now we have about 15 minutes for discussion. So if we have any questions and remarks, then please.
Yeah. Thank you all for your presentations. I would like to ask Bogusław a question about the. You said that there were around 30 youth underground organizations in the Rzeszów county. Were all of them religiously motivated, or do you have some kind of inspection in what was the percentage of those who were religiously motivated? And for Przemysław, we didn't saw this this oath because the screen behind you was not fully. If you can read that for us, because it sounds interesting. So thank you.
The 30 organization in province Rzeszów was detected, so probably more young people were active in such form of activity, but I don't have such statistics. I'm sure that all of them were believers and probably belonged to Catholic Church. These motives, religious motives, had the great importance in these 4 organizations, which I mentioned. But of course, such claims, such motives which indicated some kind of fighting for freedom of religion, we can find also in the programs of other organizations.
So I will read it, but also you can read it as well. So this is my translation from Polish. It probably is not perfect. I hope I will convey the essence of it. So it starts with, I solemnly swear the loyalty to the Polish People's Republic and its government. I promise to do everything for the advancement of its power and security. I will use my efforts so that subordinate priests, according to their civic duty in pastoral work, proclaimed the need to respect the law and the government, and the increased efforts to enhance national economy and to raise national wealth. I swear not to undertake any action which could contradict the interests of the Polish People's Republic or undermine national security and territorial integrity. In order to protect national interests, I will strive to avert any threats to national security I would become aware of. So basically, it's activism plus loyalism in terms of the borders issue, and not the questioning who the Western lands belong to, and then the exercise of the powers of bishop to pacify the clergy. Yeah?
It almost sounds like a military oath.
It's yes. If you read the one which was in 1925 Concordat, it's not as harsh and it's less call to activism, but the two things, so the loyalty of the bishop and the clergy and not contradicting the interests of state, it's like a theme, a recurrent theme of any oaths of loyalty since like 70s, 80s when they were introduced to the region, I would say.
I have two questions, one to Bogusław. Were any military organizations who took action in this period? And other questions to colleague from Slovakia. I was shocked that monks were so persecuted because in Lithuania, of course, they were persecuted, but as I know, in not such a scale. And after Stalinist time, they were persecuted because they took action in anti-Soviet activity because of that. So what situation with persecution of priests? Is it the same situation, such brutality, or monks were some exceptional, and why? Thank you.
Most of these young youth underground organizations, the members of these organizations had weapons, even these women organizations. So it is very easy to find some kind of weapon. Mention steel poles had and arsenal, plenty of and many of kind of weapon. So weapon was only one kind of structure of such organization. It doesn't mean that they use it for some purposes, but of course, from the point of view of the security services or government, this was the sign of their anti-system activity.
Actually, thank you for your question. I'm really not a specialist on this topic, but I try to replay you in the knowledge that I have, because as far as I know, the situation in Czechoslovakia from this point of view was very specific. I'm not sure if there has been any other country or nation in the Soviet bloc where the religious orders has been liquidated in the way that it took place in the Czechoslovakia during the 1950. And really the situation was such that these male religious orders were in fact liquidated, and the monks were concentrated in the so-called concentration camps or concentration monasteries. Many of them, because after this so-called barbarian night, in reality the orders were liquidated, so they could work just in the illegality and so on, and that was also one of the reasons they worked secretly, we can say, and that was the reason why the communist regime still persecuted many of these monks, even if they were in fact in reality not monks anymore, but legally, so they work secretly, and it was something which the communist regime considered as an anti-state activities and took very harsh measures against the religious orders. But this, as my colleague prepared this presentation, he already said that this process of the liquidation of the monasteries, male and women orders, were just a part of the anti-church measures which took place in the Czechoslovakia, especially during the 50s. And I'm very glad that this conference can also make some comparison in the development in the various states, and because many of our colleagues, we consider really the situation in Czechoslovakia and especially in the Slovakia as the most harsh in the Soviet bloc countries from this point of view. The anti-church measures and activities of the communist regime.
Any other questions, remarks? Then I suggest to refresh ourselves with coffee and snack, and we continue with the next panel at 11:40. Thank you very much.